It was handwritten by Charles Thompson of Mackeraw, the American Declaration of Independence, and it was printed by John Dunlap of Striven. And the first man that signed it was an Ulster man, John Hancock. And if you look at the Declaration, John Hancock, it was believed George III needed glasses to see when he was reading things. So when you look at the American Declaration, the signatures, you'll find John Hancock's is written very, very large, and he said he would write it that large that the king wouldn't need his glasses to see his name. He would see it right away. After the Revolution, these people played an important part in American society. In 1790, it's estimated that they made up 14.3% of the total white population in America. Now that has variations from 11% in New York State, where they had an Ulster County and still have an Ulster County, 13% in North Carolina, 14% in Virginia, 21% in Pennsylvania, 24% in South Carolina, and 27% in Georgia. Those were the percentages. When you look at the people who refer to themselves as having come from this part of the world today, a lot of them define themselves as Irish American. It's estimated that 60% of those people, millions of them that they are Protestant, and therefore would be tracing back a lot of them to Ulster Scots connections. And that's because they had large families. Some of them had 6, 8 or 10 of a family, and that was one of the reasons why they went across, because the average size of a farm in County Antrim from the plantation period to 1945 was 30 acres. Okay, so a family over here in Relu somewhere with maybe 5 children, they might have had, if they were lucky, 30 acres of land of which they were tenants, but they would never own. But if they went to America, the head of the household, he would receive 100 acres, and all the family members would receive 50 acres each of land that they would own. Now, it wasn't lovely land all ploughed up and ready for you to come and sow your crops. It was forests, it was land that needed drained, it was land that needed worked, and it required people who were prepared to do that. And these people were. Andrew Jackson Sr. died from exhaustion on his farm because he was working so hard. But these people were prepared to work to make this land profitable, and that's precisely what happened. And that, I think, is part of the makeup of them. That there is this tenacity, there is this strength of character, this determination to see something through. And that is a very relevant thing in terms of Ulster Scots. I think their outlook is very significant in terms of what they achieve. I think their religious outlook's very significant, and they were Presbyterian. They were coming from a very strong Calvinist tradition. They were coming from the Reformation tradition, and the idea of the Protestant work ethic was very, very significant to them. More importantly than that, in terms of their Presbyterianism was to impact on wider society, because Presbyterianism is a very democratic church structure, and it involves the annual election of moderators in presbyteries, it involves the election of elders and kirk sessions and so forth. Very democratic. And the difficulty for the authorities was that this inherent church democracy outworked itself into society, and these people started to question why they shouldn't have more say in society around them. And that was very significant too. And one of the things that sometimes some people find hard to understand in modern Irish history is the United Irish Rebellion of 1798. And they find it hard to understand because the bullet points of it are that the founders of the United Irishmen were Presbyterians. The first Republicans in Ireland were Presbyterians. And in June 1798 they rebelled. They went into open rebellion against the Crown. But you can only understand it if you understand the context of this idea of democracy and their antagonism towards the authorities. And that led them to question why the McCrackens, who were wealthy, middle-class people, why had they no say in the society around them? Why could Presbyterians not sit on city corporations? Why were these things so? And also, of course, the numbers game was significant too. These people made up a sizable proportion of the population, yet they felt that they were discriminated against. So that democratic church structure outworked into society, and it led to things like 1798. It also led to the American Revolution, because they were fed on ideas from people like Mounthill Francis Hutchinson, who was a philosopher, was born in County Down in 1690, went to Glasgow University like many of people from this part of the world did. Francis Hutchinson was influenced by others, but he developed viewpoints such as that it was right for tenants to resist, it was morally right for tenants to resist greedy landlords. Now that doesn't seem an earth-shattering idea, but it was at that time, in the period that he was writing about, and in the period he was putting forward these ideas, it was earth-shattering. And it led in the 1770s, for example, in the 6 Mile Water Valley and in the areas around Carrickfergus, to attacks on landlords and their property, even to attacks on Presbyterian ministers for owning property. And they were carried out by a group called the Hearts of Steel, who were Presbyterian tenant farmers who felt they'd been disadvantaged by their landlords. So all of those ideas are significant. John Locke, who was the philosopher of the Glorious Revolution, he devised the idea of a social contract between the people who are the people who are the citizenry, if you like, and those that govern them. And he said it was a contract, and if the person up there broke the contract, then the people down below had no moral obligation to obey it. And that was essentially the argument for the Glorious Revolution, because some people said, you know, this is not right, the king has been overthrown. How can this be? This is a revolution against the crown. And John Locke said, well, it is not. It is a conservative revolution, if anything, because it's putting things back the way they should have been before King James started to tinker with things. So the influence of people like that, and this idea of social contract, was important to these people. They were non-compromising over principles. They would not, if there was a principle, they would not bend from it. They would continue on. And they're, even to the point where this outworking, there's a fantastic story from America, just prior to the Revolution. And part of the whole, they have in America today a gun culture which is very historical. And it relates a lot to the days before the Revolutionary War and to the days on the frontier, when these people, particularly Ulster Scots people, when they went to Pennsylvania, they were welcomed with open arms by the authorities. The Governor Payne, welcomed them, and they pushed them towards the frontiers, because the Quakers lived in Pennsylvania, and there were German settlements and all the rest too. But they decided that these Ulster Scots were very fierce, determined people, and if they were on the frontier, that would be the buffer zone between them and the Indians who were attacking. So they pushed them to the frontier. So they had to form militias, and they had to have musters and things like that. And there's one account of a muster that occurred, and a written account was left of it. And again, to paraphrase what the man said, he said that the captain raised his voice, the men all went home. Now, can you imagine in a regiment, a captain or a sergeant shouting at the men and them all just down in weapons and clearing off? But that's precisely what happened, and it happened because these people thought to themselves, hold on a minute here, we elected this boy, and he's starting shouting at us. I don't think so. And off they went. But that was about the idea of democratic structure. That's what it was about. That's what it related